In the flickering lamplight of a corridor that has known darkness for 1,000 years, a 14-year-old girl walks toward a fate she cannot name. Her name is Shepon-wepet, daughter of Pharaoh Osorkon III. And though she wears gold at her throat and linen so fine it took half a year to weave, she is terrified. The year is 714 before Christ, and in the depths of the Karnak temple complex beyond the public halls where common people leave their offerings and witness ceremonies of divine majesty, something waits for her in chambers that exist in no official record. This is not a story about ancient religion as we imagine it, serene and mystical and distant. This is a story about power, about what happens when the sacred becomes a weapon, and about the daughters of kings who were sacrificed not on altars visible to the world, but in rooms where even pharaohs were forbidden to enter. What happened to these young women was worse than death, because death would have been witnessed, mourned, and remembered with honor. What happened instead was hidden under layers of religious language so carefully constructed that the victims themselves could never speak of their violation without simultaneously desecrating the foundations of their entire civilization. 3 priestesses walk beside Shepon-wepet not as guards but as escorts who have performed this task before, who have led other princesses down these same narrowing passages. One of them speaks in measured tones about honor and duty, about how the kingdom depends on this service, how Shepon-wepet will become the voice of the divine. The words are meant to comfort, but they ring hollow in the stone silence because everyone in this corridor knows that there is a gap between what will be proclaimed tomorrow in the public ceremony and what will happen tonight in the hidden chambers. It is in that gap, in that space between official narrative and buried reality, where the true transformation occurs. And no one, not even her father sitting in his palace perhaps 50 paces away through walls that might as well be mountains, will ever know exactly what fills that gap. Pharaoh Osorkon believes his daughter is being prepared for tomorrow's ceremony, the ritual marriage to the god. Amen, that will be witnessed by thousands. The conferring of titles that will make her God's wife of Ammon, one of the most powerful religious positions in all of Egypt. He believes this because he has been told that tonight's rituals are too sacred for even kings to witness, that the god requires privacy with his chosen consort. He believes because refusing to believe would require action he cannot take. The treaty has been signed. The political arrangements are complete. His daughter's dedication secures Egyptian stability at a time when foreign powers threaten from all directions. He has sacrificed his child to preserve his kingdom, and acknowledging what that sacrifice actually costs would destroy him. Better to trust the priests who promise that honor awaits. Better not to imagine what honor might require in rooms beyond his reach. The corridor ends at a door indistinguishable from the surrounding limestone except for the slight seam marking its outline. A key turns. The door swings inward onto a circular chamber 15 feet across, its walls covered in hieroglyphs that Shepon-wepet can read, but whose meanings in this context feel wrong, threatening, like prayers twisted into something else entirely. At the center sits a stone basin filled with liquid that gleams dark and strange in the lamplight. The smell is bitter, medicinal, overlaid with incense smoke that seems to coil with intention. 4 priests wait in the shadows wearing leopard skins that mark the highest ranks, their faces painted with ochre and coal in patterns that transform them from men into something else, something that claims divine authority over what is about to occur. 3 chambers away, another woman sits alone. Her name is Amenardas I, and she held the position of God's wife before the adoption system was implemented. She is 53 years old and has lived in this temple complex for 38 years. She knows exactly what is happening to Shepon-wepet right now because the same thing happened to her decades ago. She could walk to that chamber. She has the authority. She is still God's wife, soon to be replaced but not yet dismissed. She could enter that room and stop what is about to occur. Instead, she sits with hands clenched and breathing carefully controlled while sounds that should not exist reach her through the stone walls because she learned long ago that intervention is impossible, that the one time she tried to warn a younger woman about what waited she was subjected to purification rituals that lasted 3 days and left her unable to walk for a week. Tonight the sounds seem louder than usual, or perhaps after 38 years of numbness something is finally cracked and she can feel again. She sits in luxury that mocks her powerlessness and listens while another girl is destroyed in the name of divine service. And the worst part, the part that makes this worse than any public execution or visible brutality, is that tomorrow Shepon-wepet will stand before thousands of people and accept her titles with every appearance of honor. And no one will ever know what was done to make that acceptance possible. To understand how this became possible, how Egyptian high priests gained the power to control Pharaoh's daughters in ways that even kings could not prevent, you must understand that this was not the work of a single corrupt individual but a system built carefully over centuries. The Ammon priesthood did not seize this power through sudden violence or obvious conspiracy. They accumulated it gradually through mechanisms that seemed legitimate at every step, until one day they possessed authority that rivaled the throne itself, and no one could remember exactly when the balance had shifted. By the time of Ramesses III around 1150 before the Common Era, the Ammon temples controlled nearly 1/3 of Egypt's arable land, employed tens of thousands of workers, operated vast workshops and trading expeditions, and maintained private armies for protecting their holdings. This was not a religious institution in any modern sense. This was an economic empire that happened to operate under the language of divine service. The position of God's wife of Amun had existed for centuries, but it transformed during Egypt's fragmented Third Intermediate period when pharaohs were weak and needed priestly legitimacy to rule. The Kushite pharaohs who reunited Egypt around 750 before the Common Era faced a particular problem because they were foreign conquerors whose right to rule was questioned by traditional Egyptian nobility. They needed the Theban priesthood's recognition more desperately than most rulers, and the priests had leverage. They could grant or withhold religious legitimacy, and they used that leverage to extract an unprecedented concession. The pharaoh's daughter, not his wife or mother, would become God's wife of Amun. She would be dedicated young, before marriage, and take vows of chastity that prevented her from bearing heirs. She would adopt the next God's wife as her successor, creating a chain of succession that existed outside normal dynastic lines. Most critically, she would reside permanently in Thebes within the temple complex under priestly supervision, surrendered completely to an institution that the throne was supposedly trying to manage. If you're still watching, if this story has gripped you the way it gripped me when I first uncovered these fragments in ancient texts that scholars rarely discuss openly, then please consider subscribing to this channel. This is not easy history to research or present. These are stories that academia often keeps locked in technical language, hidden behind euphemisms that obscure what actually happened to real women in real moments of terror and powerlessness. Your subscription helps ensure these stories reach people who need to hear them, who need to understand that sophisticated civilizations with magnificent art and architecture and philosophy can simultaneously construct systems of abuse so normalized that participants could not see them as abuse at all. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories like this, stories that refuse to let the past remain comfortably distant. The adoption requirement that became mandatory for God's wives served one specific purpose that inscriptions never openly stated. It ensured that each pharaoh's daughter, once adopted by her predecessor, legally belonged to that line of succession rather than to her birth family. The woman who adopted you controlled your inheritance, determined whether you received the estates and authority associated with the position, and could theoretically revoke the adoption if you proved unsuitable. This created a chain of obligation that ran through the priestly institution rather than through royal lineage, and it meant that each pharaoh could not reclaim his daughter once she entered the system. The priesthood had found a mechanism to permanently extract royal daughters from family control while maintaining the appearance of honoring those families with the highest religious distinction. What happened in those hidden chambers during dedication rituals was documented only in fragmentary references that reveal themselves through careful analysis of what official records strategically omit. The public ceremonies were magnificent, witnessed by thousands, recorded in inscriptions that praised the piety of pharaohs who gave their daughters to divine service. But between the public pronouncements and the private reality lay procedures that served purposes having nothing to do with religion and everything to do with control. The genius of the system was that it transformed abuse into sacred duty through rituals that victims could not describe without simultaneously attacking the religious foundations of their entire society. The women who survived these chambers emerged unable to speak of what had occurred not because they were prevented from speaking, but because the system had developed techniques for ensuring that victims could not articulate their own violation in any language that society would recognize as valid. Shepenwepet emerged from that chamber before dawn and stood in the public ceremony the next day to receive her titles before assembled crowds who saw only the honor being bestowed. She would hold the position for decades, controlling vast wealth and enormous estates, wielding power that made her one of the most influential people in Egypt. And every year she would adopt the next pharaoh's daughter when that girl reached the appropriate age, perpetuating a system she could not escape and could not expose without destroying herself. The last god's wife of Amun served until 525 before the Common Era when Persian conquest ended the practice, and with her the tradition died. But the chambers remained, buried under sand and silence, waiting for archaeologists who would one day excavate them and wonder at marks on stone, walls that suggested purposes no official inscription ever explained. Tell me in the comments, how do we recognize similar systems in our own time? Structures of power that hide abuse under language so respectable that victims cannot speak without attacking the foundations of their own communities. History is not safely in the past. The mechanisms that created these chambers are still being built today under different names,